Hello, welcome to Enneagram Talker Brandon. Today we're talking about our Nemesis typings. Well, I say Nemesis typings as in like facing our Nemesis. This is another video in the spooky season of like the darker side of the Enneagram. So, I got the inspiration from Resident Evil 3. There is a character that is the antagonist in the series of that game called Nemesis. And basically, the whole premise of Resident Evil 3 is you're fighting against this Nemesis creature who decided to attack all of the members of STARS, which is the protagonist's, team. Mainly, the protagonist herself, Jill Valentine, is the one that's going to be, taken up by Nemesis. And the entire game, Nemesis stalks you and seeks to end you. And I got the inspiration from that, thinking about, zombies and then I started waking up, a Big Chestnut and Uranio Pius, it talks about your zombie typings, and I kind of started to look at that, and I was like, and I thought of Nemesis, and I was like, oh, I did something about Nemesis, yeah, let's add that for the spooky season. So, the Greek word of Nemesis is nemein, if I can pronounce it right. It is to give what is due, and the Greek goddess of Nemesis is like the personification of nemein. To be defined as a nemesis, there is either the inescapable agent of someone's or something's downfall, or to be a long-standing rival or arch enemy. So, for reference, I'm going to use nemesis as in the downfall definition, not the antagonist up against somebody definition. So then I thought, well, what leads to a person's downfall? What leads to their nemesis? And there's internal factors and external factors. I'll be focusing on the internal factors because that's kind of what the Enneagram is based about. Based about is the internal stuff, like how we relate to life. So, our nemesis can be a cumulative amount of either our own poor choices, self-destructive patterns, behaviors, lack of self-discipline, fear, and negative thinking. So then I thought about the Enneagram, and I was like, so Nemesis could be our shadows and our blind spots. And I thought, that's what almost makes our Nemesis happen, because we have these negative sides of us that we can be stuck in. And that negative stuckenness is what leads us to then do stuff that gets us in trouble, or has ramifications how we interact with the world around us. So, the shadows in the Enneagram are based on what is casted out by the ego itself, the typing. They're automatic behaviors that protect us and keep us trapped in a blindness, quote unquote. We use it to defend ourselves when it really is just not helping us at all. And for blind spots, our blind spots are what we don't see. They can blind us to the impact that these things have on us, on our thoughts, on our feelings, and our actions, and how they affect the people around us too. Without facing our nemesis, before it takes us down, we can be trapped by our ego, which is our typing. And, they lead to how do you face the nemesis? Because in the game, you have a choice of running from nemesis and fighting until you cannot stop. You can only run so far, and then you have to fight him in you have to fight him at least once in the game. But you can run from him multiple times if you're afraid of getting owned by nemesis in the game. So the Enneagram itself is the weapon we have. It can strike at our nemesis, our blind spots, our shadows, and they can make us face and change our behavior. When I thought about what are the nemesises of each type, and I'm going to go through all the types in this video. For type 1, the nemesis is named as the rigidity locker. I made up the names, so blame it on me if you don't like it. So, inner critic of the 1, coupled with anger as a deadly sin. Coupled with rigidity, because when they get stressed out, they can be very black and white, very definitive and like what this has to be this way. It has to be this way. They can't be flexible. And they have they can neglect their own need to relax. So when they don't relax, they don't kind of like step away. They're so focused on doing stuff by the book. And they have their inner critic voices in overdrive when they're stressed out because it personifies it. And their anger is just even more at the point where they're going to boil over. All of that leads them to be trapped in themselves. And the type 1 can be taken as really much a purist, Puritan, whatever. And it can lead them to not have that connection with people around them. And it can push people away from them as a downside. For the type 2, their nemesis is called the silent snuffler. Because they are unable to ask for help. They're unable to say no, and that's coupled with their pride, and their deadly sin is pride. They have a fear of, and they avoid intimacy. And they often see it as transactional giving. I work to give you this, I expect to get something back from you from that result. And that keeps them trapped in their sin. Their sin of pride. I have to keep on doing stuff. I can't be vulnerable. I can't be real. It stifles them from being able to connect with people. It makes them disconnected. And them being unable to say no and unable to ask for help, even if they really need to have help, leads them to then be almost trapped in their own sense of, I can't get out of this, I'm stuck in this. And they can be really frustrated and bitter. And that can lead into acting out and going into type 8 and acting out and being rather like a bulldozer. And then realizing they just burned all their bridges around them because they were caught in their typing. For type 3, their nemesis is called the Camouflaged Businessman. So they often are very busy. They're busy to avoid their emotions. And they deny the value of failure in their lives as part of their shadow blind spots. And they are very reliant on their fake self. Type 3s are known as the chameleon. So for them, like, being busy is tied to like their fake self. I have to be something to prove that I'm worth value. I have this. And they deny the feeling of value because if you remember, they're in the competitive triad, so they often try to cope with pain by trying to do things like to be and appear successful, to appear this way. Because if they appear, they'll actually have what they think they value. For type 4, their nemesis is called emotional grabber. So by holding onto their emotions and not letting them move and going on forward, and not being present to life, as LaHue says, because they're stuck in either the past or the future because they're idealists and they're romanticized. They seek understanding in ways that prevent it from actually happening. And for that, I'm going to actually look into the book to explain that a little bit further, because without me saying more, it's kind of like, okay, I don't quite get it. So, and in the book it asks, do you assume everyone experiences emotions the same way you do? Do you devalue people who undervalue or avoid feeling emotions? Do you avoid taking your responsibility when misunderstandings persist in your relationships? Here are some things you can do to integrate your blind spot. And they do things like notice and own how important being fully understood by others is to you, and explore what this means to you. Practice balancing emotion and mental activity when communicating with others, especially people who experience discomfort in the face of emotions. Avoid using language that's too sophisticated or abstract because there could be self-referencing, or that is very metaphorical. It may prevent others from understanding you. Learn how to communicate more directly and simply. Explore tendency to amp up your emotions or your emotional intensity in response to feeling misunderstood. So often, this is about being misunderstood in itself and trying to find understanding, but you're very much going about it with metaphors and similes because you want people to chase you as a 4. And you're not going to get that, aptly put. Observe the way to try to make yourself understood by the people in your life and check in with others to see if they work. become more aware of the ways you communicate with your emotions to people who do not relate to emotions in the same way you do. Realize that you need to educate people about how emotional you are and how much you need to feel understood. So yeah, this is basically about like being emotional in the face of being misunderstood, and how you kind of use that to withdraw, and you use it to either amp up your intensity, or you try to explain in metaphors and similes and all that jazz. So, with me saying that with the type 4s and Nemesis, the emotional grabber, what basically happens is the 4 gets caught up in their emotions, and they essentially like have that stop them in their tracks. They can often see what's not good, and when they're caught up in their own like darkness, because 4s are often known as seeing their other set apart. They're very, I'm set apart. I don't fit into the group. I don't belong in the group. I'm outside of the group. And those are all negatives, or they can be negatives. And they're the first ones because they're also idealists. They can also see what's wrong with something, what's missing, what's not happening in their lives. And they can hone in on that and fixate on it, which keeps them locked in their own cycle. They're not present to their life then. They're caught up by something that's not even really relevant to them. For type 5s, their nemesis is called the Intellilocked. The Intellectualizer is the defense mechanism of the type 5. They rationalize, they are also withdrawn, and they fail to communicate clearly. And they see learning as a central objective. 5s are all about knowing stuff. They rationalize their emotions. They use it as a knowledge base. So for the type 5, the intellectual side of them can keep them trapped in their emotions. They're not often okay with expressing how they feel emotionally. So their intelligence can also prevent them from being full and authentic and valuable and true to themselves and to others around them. It keeps them stuck and almost blocked off between the walls of them around them. And it can keep them from being around people as a result. For the 6s, their nemesis is called the Prophetic Doomsayer. They are very vigilant. They have a bad things will happen mindset to them. They're also a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you reference that, that's a whole motif of like, I could go into a store and say it's going to be a bad day, and I go walking around and the store gets robbed. Oh, yeah, it was a bad day. This happened. This is why it's a bad day. I felt this in my head. I felt this in my heart, and it's true. And then they can use that to almost like prevent them from being like optimistic down the road because, oh, this is going to happen. This is bad. I have this thing about me. They can also become accustomed to stress and to fear because they're type 6. They're often known as the fear type, the main fear type of the fear triad. They also struggle with not seeing what doesn't go wrong. Kind of like how the 4 doesn't see things that's going, the 4s are not seeing what's good. The 6s don't see what's good either. But it's different for both types. For the 4, it's all the emotional stuff and they're idealistic. For the 6s, they're often aware of threats and dangers, and it's very much about the physical security of their grouping, of them themselves. So they may see threats and be focused on the threats, and they see like, oh, this is all going to be going to hell in a handbasket. But the 4 may just feel that way because another one lights out at their workplace and it bothers them. And they may fixate on that. Oh, this job sucks. I'm in the darkness, things like that, and whatever like that. They just deal with it. And also failing to own their own power. 6s tend to live in a mindset of, I can't stop things, I can't fix things, I'm stuck in this cycle. But 6s are known as the problem solvers. They are often troubleshooters. They have immense power to them. But when they're stuck in their vigilance, their bad things mindset, their self-fulfilling prophecy mindset, their fears, their stresses, it prevents them from being that to people. It stops them. They become the prophetic doomsayer, and it almost becomes their own like self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. For the 7s, their nemesis is called the Leech of Avoidance, like the bug leech They have a reliance on good feelings and experiences. They tend to avoid problems and avoid accountability. Disregard pain and negative data. And I put in here FOMO, the fear of missing out. So I'm going to look at the disregarding pain and negative data so I can kind of explain that a little bit more. Because 7s are in the positive outlook group, and that's why they tend to avoid the pain and feelings. They tend to avoid negativity. So I'm going to read the passage of disregarding pain and negative data. Do you focus on what feels good to avoid what might feel bad? Do you pursue what feels pleasant without realizing you are also avoiding something? Do you automatically reframe negatives as positives? You sometimes just not see the negatives of a situation. Here's how much you can take to integrate this blind spot. Notice how hard it is to look at and talk about something that seems negative. What stands in your way of something that's true when it doesn't feel good? Become more aware of how focusing only on good feelings acts as a defense against experiencing painful feelings. Think deeply about all the reasons you have to protect yourself from any kind of difficult emotion. Notice any situation in your life that has worsened as a result of your resistance to acknowledging fear, anxiety, stress, sadness, or pain. Own that you dislike of anything you identify as boring or uncomfortable operates as a way to avoid negative emotions. Observe your tendency to see only the good side of things. Notice if you do this even more, if you sense that something negative data exists somewhere in your life. Explore a tendency to focus on how to improve things without truly facing what isn't working. When you find it difficult to feel disappointed when situations don't turn out the way you wanted them to, and then consciously allow yourself to feel the disappointment. So basically what that means is, for the 7s, they have a tendency to reframe. They're in a positive outlook group, and they can almost use that to almost spiral them to the next big exciting thing and fight against their inner fear of negativity, of boredom, of being trapped in emotional cycles, of negative emotions. And so I call it the Leech of Avoidance because it almost sucks that out of them. It sucks into like avoiding stuff. Ooh, here's a negative thing. Let's avoid it. Let's avoid it. And just like sucks into their head. It's like a second emotion to them. But you need to face that eventually. Otherwise, they're gonna never really grow up. They call it the 7 the Peter Pan at times because it's a similar thing. You don't often grow as a person unless you face your battles and fight with them. For the 8s, the nemesis is called the Bulldozing Boar. You're unable to be vulnerable with people. You can be a warrior and like go for the kill and then realizing, oh, I shouldn't have done that, kind of deal. Not understanding your impact on others, assuming your truth equals the truth, and unable to see the good in others. You tend to be, as an 8, very aggressive, very assertive, and that can lead you to be, almost rooting for the underdog, but there's times where you almost step in unannounced and you react out of that mindset, reacting out of your tendency to just march and take control of the room. And what that can lead to then is people try to avoid you because you're just the one that comes in the room and you take over the terrain. And if you're unhealthy and you're constantly like going up and fighting with people and they just catch on to that, that might lead you to then being pushed aside, to being disregarded, and leaving you feeling alone, which makes you even more reactive because you're in a reactive triad like I am and the 6s are. And it made you to push back and be more assertive and try to control the room because you fear having that loss of control. And that cycle repeats itself. For the 9s, the nemesis is called the Creep of Contentment. You're stuck on comfort and being passive, unable to have conflict because you tend to naturally try to avoid conflict to have your inner status quo. You avoid anger, and you also tend to not knowing what you want, which is kind of like a part of how 9s have a hard time asserting themselves. I think themselves versus a type 9. but I think they're more of a 9 than a 5, because they tend to really not voice their concerns. They're not very assertive and not very like much aggressive, like an 8 is or a 1 can be. So I think they can be like a 9. I don't have anything to really back that, but that's kind of what I think of them as. There's times where I've seen, like with 9s, well, 9s can be, when they're in contentment and being stuck in that, they tend to be passive when something happens to them, and they're like, oh, it's okay. It's not really okay. You're just telling yourself it's okay to make yourself feel better. But it's not okay, because you really feel something about that inside. But they can live in that contentment and almost have a second status of being, if I'm not fighting with somebody, I am okay. I may not be living the life I want to live, but I'm okay. And that can lead them to being in that cycle of contentment that creeps up on you. And the big takeaway, I guess, after saying all those types of the nemesis we all have to face in our lives, is like John was in Evil 3, we all have to face what our nemesis is. It seeks to destroy us and all that we know as ourselves. We can choose to run, but only for so long. Nemesis seeks to dispose of us, similar to a shark or a vulture, or even our ravenous ex that seeks to repair their own broken heart. The Enneagram itself is a weapon. It calls us out. It calls us out as a mirror to see our own nemesis, to see our own darkness, to see those shadows, the blind spots we have. It does also show us a glimmer of hope, to point out a battle plan, if you will, to integrate. Our nemesis can be stopped by doing work on ourselves via quote-unquote shadow work and challenging our blind spots and shadows. It's also a symbol of hope. We're not destined to be stuck in our own patterns of our types that our types live out on their own. If I may say so, Enneagram calls us to wake up to our nemesises, hence the name of this book, Enneagram Waking Up. And yeah, so that being said, that's kind of my second video, discussing some of the types of the Enneagram and the darkness that we all face. It is a little bit of a darker subject, if you will. Like, it's not really dark as in, like, secretive stuff, like I talked about last episode, but it's darker in terms of, like, the material can lead us to going down a darker avenue. Hope you guys have a good weekend. Take care. Enjoy yourselves. Be true to life. Be present to life. As Tommy Who says, true to yourselves. Take care, guys. Goodbye.